Wait, hold on. Let me guess. Your supervisor said submit your thesis proposal. And now you are just staring at your own laptop like, what exactly am I even supposed to do? Yeah, you are not alone. Most students don't struggle because they are not smart. They struggle because nobody explains this thing properly. So let's fix that. That is a whole lot better. I think I'll try to do this in the few minutes I have here. First, forget the big grammar and the scary words. A thesis proposal is actually very, very simple. Sometimes it is called a research protocol. So a thesis proposal is just you saying, this is what I want to study, this is why it matters, and this is exactly how I will do it. That is it. Think of it like you are planning a trip. You are telling someone where you are going, why you are going on that trip, and how you will get there. If your plan makes sense, you get approved. If it is confusing, they send you back. So what are the important reality most students miss when it comes to the proposal or protocol? Listen carefully. This is where most students mess up. Some schools want your proposal to include certain sections. So you must make sure that you look at the institution you are in and the samples or the template they have for you to follow. So some schools want you to include these 3 chapters, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. That is introduction, literature review, and methodology. But usually most of the time it's just chapter 1 and 3. So if you skip chapter 2, some school expects it. And sometimes some schools don't expect you to also skip chapter 2. So you have to make sure you align yourself with the requirements of the institution you are in. So always check your guidelines first. Now let's walk through the proposal like a real student. Let's say your topic is social media and student study habits. So I'll show you how each part works like you're actually writing it. So the very first thing you have to do is the title page, of course. This is just a straightforward thing. You list your topic, your name and department, and probably the school. Don't overtake it. Just make your title clear. And some schools again have templates for it. So always make sure you are showing clarity on the first page. Then the first thing you need to get for your thesis proposal is the abstract. Think of it like a trailer. This is like Netflix previewing your research. In a few lines, you explain what the issue is, what you want to do, how you would do it, and what you expect to find. And usually the abstract comes last. Once you've already done the other chapters, you can now have enough information to do the abstract. So it should be short and clear and straight to the point. And most of the time, it is just a summary of 250 words or 350 words, depending on what your institution guidelines are. Then chapter 1, this is the introduction. This is where you tell the story. And this is where most students either shine or completely confuse their supervisor. Always make sure you start simple. You are basically just saying this is what is going on in the real world and here is the problem. So the introduction could be anything from the background, the problem statement, justification, or the rationale behind the study, the objectives, and so forth. An example could be you starting with something like students use social media in their everyday life. It helps them connect, but it also distracts them from studying. Something around this, you are giving enough context. And then you zoom into something like the problem is we don't fully understand how this affects their study habits, and then you explain why it matters. You see, you are just telling a logical story in the introduction. Then chapter 2, that is if it is required, is usually just a literature review. And this part always scares people, but it is really just you saying that this is what other people have already found and this is what is missing. So you are basically saying, okay, I'm not the first person here. Let's see what others have discovered. An example could be like one study found students who spend more time on social media procrastinate more, and the other, you are going to be critical with these aspects and link them together. Then you also add the key part that most other studies forget, and that is where your gap is. That is where your research comes in. So you are making sure that the literature review is focused and aligning with your research objectives. Without this section, your work can almost feel like you're repeating what already exists. Then chapter 3, this is where your game plan comes in, the methodology. This is where you prove that you actually know what you are doing. So you are answering questions like, how exactly will I do this research? And you keep it very, very practical. Stuff like, I would survey 100 students, I'll use a questionnaire, I'll analyze the results using percentages and patterns. Mind you, every chapter has subsections. So these subsections and the methodology could include study design, study site or study population, inclusion and exclusion criteria. Again, all these would be outlined in sample studies that your school has done, as in previous proposals or theses that have been uploaded to your school repository, or even the template that your school supervisors will give you. So the process here should be very clear, so that if someone reads your methodology and still asks, but how will you do it? Then that means it is not clear enough. So your processes should be clear. Then you have other aspects of the proposal that include stuff like expected results or expected outcomes. This is where you state what you think you'll find. And then you also have ethical consideration. And this is where you talk about how you are going to protect people's information. And then you also have timeline or work schedule. This is where you show how long everything will take and what are the deadlines you think you'll be able to reach per every week or every month. And this usually comes in the form of a Gantt chart. Then you also talk about your budget. Even small costs like printing or travel can come here. And then you have your appendix, which is where you put other supporting materials not in the main proposal, like your questionnaire, informed consent, and other things. So these parts show that you've thought about everything. You've thought everything through and not just that you have the idea. So let me be honest with you here. Your proposal doesn't need to be perfect. That is why it is a proposal, but it needs to be very clear. If your supervisor reads it and understands what you are doing, why it matters, or how you will do it, then you are already ahead of your other colleagues. So next time you hear someone say submit your thesis proposal or let's do a thesis proposal, don't panic. You are not writing something magical. You are just explaining your idea clearly, step by step, and also following the outline or templates given to you by your institution. And once you understand that, everything becomes a lot easier. All the best in your research journey. Until next time, bye.